So we've kind of defined the revolution and kind of
Mhm.
given some examples of it. So how do we go about fighting against the revolution and the counter-revolution part of
Yes,
revolution and counter-revolution?
absolutely. So I wrote down four different points of counter-revolutionary action.
Hmm.
And this is very summary. There's a lot more depth we could go into, but I would say the first most important thing is to know the revolution, because the revolution advances, one of its means of advancing is what Dr. Plino talked about as tendential revolution. And this is something very unique to the thought of Dr. Plino. A lot of people understood the historic process of revolution before Dr. Plino. One of the things that he keyed in on was tendential revolution, how through fashions, through the arts, through things that don't necessarily present themselves as an ideology, have an ideological element that can change the ideology of man.
Hmm.
And you see this very clearly, for example, music. So music in the hippie era, everyone said sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Why did they clump those three together? It's because that music somehow is in consonance with drug abuse and sexual promiscuity.
Hmm.
They fit together. That and one of the elements of rock and roll music is the beat takes front stage to the melody. So man kind of tribally kind of moves with the beat. It's speaking to his passions instead of his intellect. That has a very, very profound effect on the soul, and it forms who we are. Because what happens is those tendencies, if accepted, lead to ideas. And once those ideas take root, it leads to facts, actually changing society.
Hmm.
So, understanding the revolution and especially understanding this tendential side of it, we arm ourselves to be able to resist it. Because our founder, Dr. Payne, always used to say that which is not explicitly rejected is implicitly accepted.
Hmm.
So, know the revolution and try to see its manifestations in the world in order to guard yourself against it.
Hmm.
Another thing, point two, that's very, very important is we need to develop a means of unmasking the revolution. And that deals with the fact that the revolution is a process. So, in the height of the French culture, in the time of St. Louis IX, if you went to someone and said, cut off the head of the king, they would have rejected it. What happened was, through a long period of tendential revolution, seeds got planted, and slowly, they got to the point in which they were capable of carrying out such a bloody revolution against proper authority. So the tactic would be, when those tendential things and those bad ideas first started to take root in society, if someone were effectively able to unmask it and say, okay, this isn't a big deal, but look at where it's leading. That's unmasking the revolution. And if people understand that process, it arms them against it. They say, no, I'm not going there because I see where it leads.
Hmm.
We can do that in society a lot. You know, you mentioned the link between transgenderism and homosexuality.
Hmm.
You know, if and a lot of, and the link between homosexuality and pedophilia, which we're dealing with, the more effectively you can show, and maybe it's not a good example because homosexuality should be entirely rejected anyway, but you take a people like the United States that's accepted homosexuality, you show them effectively that that homosexuality leads to transgenderism, they take a step back. So the first thing is know the revolution, arm yourself against it. The second is develop ways to unmask the final goals of these things in society. It's a very important point. The third thing I would say is network. One of the prime things that we do inside the TFP is we try to unite like-minded individuals. There's a quote in the Bible, excuse me, that I like very much. It's from Ecclesiastes. It says, "Woe to him who is alone." So if you're carrying on this fight and you're isolated and you don't think anyone thinks like you, it becomes an insurmountable obstacle to overcome. But if you find those hidden souls that are opposing the revolution and you link them together, you have a movement that can be started and that can effectively work against the revolution. I know a lot of your viewers are, as I said, familiar with our student action videos where we go to
Mhm.
college campuses. We go to the most radical universities. We went to Berkeley in order to promote traditional marriage. And every time we do that, we have Berkeley students, we have students come up to us and kind of under their breath, I agree with you. So if we're seeing that, that means no matter where you are, there are like-minded individuals.
Mhm.
And when they're scattered and they think no one else thinks like them, they're not going to do anything effectively. When you bring them together, you're able to fight the revolution as a whole.
Mhm.
And the last thing, which is very important, is something our founder used to call breaking the consensus. Because as long as people may be against something, but as long as they don't speak out, create a rift in a social circle, that consensus allows the revolution to go on completely freely. But the moment one person stands up and says this isn't right, it throws a monkey wrench in the whole process.
Mhm.
So I think that's a very important thing also to fight against the revolution, is to have the courage when you hear something you know is not right, stand up and say it. And the transgenderism, I think, is a perfect example of that. It was going on completely unabated for time. I mean, was resistance, but no one would have guessed that here in California, one of the most liberal states in the union, 80% of people are against transitioning kids. 80% of the population, but 80% of the people weren't standing up. One person standing up breaks that consensus and allows people to gather together and provide a united front against what's going on.
Mhm. And that's something I've certainly noticed. It's not like, I mean, anyone who's sitting here discussing ideas online is probably not going to be afraid of speaking their mind. And so it's like, I'm
Yeah.
obviously not afraid of speaking my mind, but I do notice that, especially out of more normal people,
Hmm.
a lot of them, whether they just sometimes don't care, they don't have time, but I think oftentimes they might just feel scared.
Yes,
And when you take the step forward, you give them permission to
that's the point.
to say what they believe,
You
and
enable
it's pretty.
them to stand up themselves.
Yes.
Because it's one thing for us to fight against the revolution. That's good, but much better is inciting others to fight against the revolution. And
Mhm.
you empower them to do that when you break the
Mhm.
consensus.
Yeah. Bring up a comment really quick here from our good friend Jorge
Oh,
Rodriguez,
Jorge's
who
online.
yes, good morning, Jorge. Um, So for the revolution, one thing that I had kind of, when I had first met you and first started reading through these ideas and kind of
Yes.
trying to understand them, at the time I was transitioning away from being like an anarcho-capitalist libertarian. And so because
Yes.
of that, I was looking at all these different governmental systems and they all seemed kind of weird to me. And
Yes.
so for me, I kind of just wanted an answer of this is what Catholics are supposed to believe in and
Right.
this is what we're supposed to move forward for. But it's really not that simple. And the TFP has kind of, I know you guys through the book you gave me. I'm totally forgetting what it's called right now.
Mobility.
No, it's the one by John
Return to
Horvath.
order.
Return to Order. Yeah, I actually have it right
Yes.
there. I just saw it.
Mhm.
So through that and through the TFP as well, you guys do talk about it's important for us to be involved in the world, in society. But for a
Absolutely.
lot of people, they look at these governmental issues, and to some extent, obviously, you and I might have issues with the current governmental system, but it's
Sure.
not like, if we went and switched to a monarchy tomorrow, our problems aren't going to go away.
Absolutely not.
What can
Absolutely
you
not.
kind of speak towards that?
Of course. Um, there's always a tendency because it's simpler to try to come up with a perfect system. And after original sin, a perfect system does not exist. So the essential aspect is to change man. The field of action is the soul of man himself. So if you're able to convert man, any legitimate system will work towards the common good. If you're not able to convert man, you might have the perfect system, but that system is going to be abused, it's going to be taken advantage of, and it's not going to lead to something good. So the essential element is not coming up with the perfect system. And another thing I will say about systems is systems of government have to spring naturally from the history of the people. You can't artificially put one form of government on a people that have developed another form of government. Again, as long as it's legitimate. So one of the aspects of what we would call, what our founder would call organic society, is that it's something that springs forth legitimately from the people. I just want to say this is not a hippie thing, oh, it comes from me, so it's good. No, this is spontaneous, but it's something that is spontaneity governed by principles of morality. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, it feels good to go abuse drugs. No, I can be spontaneous in going after my dreams or, developing my talents because my intellect says this is spontaneous, but it's a good course to take. So systems of government have to spring from that. Now, I will say that St. Thomas wrote about this, and it's very interesting. He defined 3 legitimate forms of government: democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy. And he said, of the just considered in the abstract, monarchy is the greatest of the 3 because it most imitates the government structure in heaven, in which Christ is the king. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that that's the system that's going to apply best to any given situation. So his opinion was that a Catholic should admit that monarchy is the best form of government, but that doesn't mean he has to want monarchy for his country. And one of the things that St. Thomas said that I thought was very interesting is he said the ideal form of government would be a government in which all 3 forms had their place. And you see that very much in medieval society. You had a king that ruled over a nation. You had an aristocracy or a nobility that ruled over smaller sections. And then a lot of local decisions were made through democracy. The guilds had a democratic system. A lot of towns would elect their mayor. So what that does is it allows, it's very decentralized. You want decentralization because it allows people to have a voice in how their lives are led. So you can have a good structure. Obviously, absolute monarchy is not a good thing, but the dissemination of power is always is the ideal way of going about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth really hitting on. I feel like we've done a good job with the explanation of the main 2 things. That's what I really wanted to focus on today.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I feel like if there's anything, you and I could speak about a million things for a million hours. So there's really, we could go forever, but I really wanted to get those 2 out there, especially because when I talk to people online, I'll kind of tell them this, and I can tell that especially someone who isn't kind of reading or hasn't had some low level introduction into this, it's something that is not immediately understandable.
Right.
And so I thought that, having this as a reference for people to send them and say, look at this video, look at this, this could be really quick. And then, there's that. That's good. I think that's probably good for today. Like I said, I didn't think it would be too long. I really wanted to get the 2 of those things out, and then I'm sure we can come back and find a topic to hyperanalyze in the future.
Absolutely. Anytime, Caleb. And I want to, again, thank you for having me on your podcast. It was really a pleasure. And anytime we can continue in the future.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I know it's early on a Saturday, so I'm sure most of you are busy. If you watch this after the fact, thank you. I will put the TFP website in the description once this video gets posted. And then I will also, when I clip it into smaller sections, I'll make sure it's there as well.
And if I could ask, returntoorder.org is also a great website to put up there because that deals more with current events and how they fit into the revolutionary process. It puts a lot of flesh on that skeleton that we were talking about.
Yes. And then, last thing, for TFP materials, the book Revolution and Counter-Revolution, which is foundational, is what you're talking about today, is very affordable. It's less than $10. So if this is these are ideas that were interesting to you, then feel free to go and buy that book. It's really not hard to get access to. It's available all over the internet.
And it is available for free online also.
Yes, PDF, right? Yes. Absolutely. So yeah, for anyone who wants to access that as well.